Hey, what it is, YouTube? Here with another episode of Talk Boxing. On this episode, I'll be giving y'all my post fight thoughts on the fights that I'll be discussing on this episode of Talk Boxing. The fight with Dan Azeez and Joshua Buatsi that happened a little while ago, and as well as the fight with Benn and Peter Dobson, and as well as the fight with Natasha Jonas and Mikaela, and as well as what's been happening in the sport of boxing as of late. First, I'll be giving y'all my thoughts on the fights. The first fight, I'll be giving y'all my post-fight thoughts are the fight that happened with Joshua Buatsi and Dan Azeez. Now, this fight was of important magnitude because this determined the number one contender to be next in line to challenge for, I believe, was either the WBA or the WBO light heavyweight title, and this fight was also for the British and the Commonwealth light heavyweight title as well, between two undefeated, up-and-coming young prospect fighters that has been building a name and a reputation out there in England. And I have mentioned this countless times about how healthy the local scene is out there in England when it comes to their local domestic boxing scene. And the turnout for this event was nothing less than what I expected from the British boxing fan base. There was a good amount of support for this fight with Buatsi and Azeez, as it should be. And I've been saying this over here in the Western Hemisphere, especially in the U.S., there should be support for up-and-coming prospect talents that is based in America like there is out there in the UK. Anyways, let's get on with how the fight went with Buatsi and Azeez. And Buatsi, I picked to win this fight prior to this fight happening. Now, if I don't know if y'all saw my community post where I had said that I was picking Buatsi to win this fight via decision, and that's what happened. He outworked Azeez in this fight. He dominated majority of this fight. He dropped Azeez twice in this fight during the latter rounds. And the first knockdown happened when Buatsi landed a flurry of combination of punches, flooring Azeez for the first time. And Azeez looked rocked by the knockdown. However, he was able to bounce back and go right back at it. And that was during the heat of the exchange when the pace of the fight was starting to pick up. And then when Azeez got overzealous, Buatsi, who was a more accurate fighter and was landing the more better punches, would drop Azeez yet again by catching him with a straight right hand to drop him for the second time in the fight. And I had this fight score 117 to 109 in favor of Joshua Buatsi, and the official judges, I believe, had the fight score 117 to 109, while two of the other judges had it scored 118 to 108 in favor of Joshua Buatsi. So Joshua Buatsi still remains undefeated, and as I had said throughout the majority of the fight, Buatsi was the more busier fighter. I was impressed with his punch placement and his ability to mix up his punches from going upstairs and downstairs, and how accurate he was. And his work rate was able to keep Azeez in his shell, and Azeez wasn't able to throw as many shots as he would like to. And when Azeez decided to fire back, that's when Azeez was getting caught with the punches that was accurate from Joshua Buatsi, and Buatsi showed the power in his hands by dropping Azeez during the exchange when Azeez decided to not be on guard and decided to throw back. And Buatsi, his ring generalship was also displayed in this fight, and that was impressive. and as well as his ability to control the range in this fight was impressive as well. Now, not only did Joshua Buatsi display his power and his ability to place his punches and be accurate and throw combinations of shots, and Joshua Buatsi's ability to be able to work at a good fast-paced volume with good amount of work rate and good amount of punches for him to stay active throughout the majority of the fight. His durability, his stamina was displayed at top shape and tip-top condition, and as well as his technical aspects and his fundamental skills was at display as well. And this was his toughest test by far in his young professional career. And Joshua Buatsi did that versus a fighter who I would say on paper, to boxing fans who hasn't seen enough of both Azeez and Buatsi and what they have done prior to this fight, would say was equal on paper. They would have said it was a 50-50 fight on paper because of how fresh both of these fighters are and where they are at before, during their respective careers heading into this fight. And Joshua Buatsi, I was favoring him to win this fight because from what I've seen prior to them meeting in the ring, that Buatsi was the more skilled fighter heading into this fight, and he proved that in this fight that we saw. And now Buatsi is next in line to challenge the undisputed champion in the light heavyweight division, depending on who wins the fight that's happening in June between Dmitry Bivol and Arthur Beterbiev, who are undefeated light heavyweight champions, the only two undefeated light heavyweight champions in that division. And I did say during the post-fight video that I made following the Beterbiev and Smith fight that the only fight left for both the champions in the light heavyweight division would be for them to fight each other. And it's happening this year in June. And that is boxing continuing the momentum that they got going on right now. And that is making the fights that the fans want to see. And Beterbiev and Bivol is one of those fights that is, without a shadow of a doubt, that the boxing crowd wants to campaign for. And it's happening. And Buatsi, because of this victory that he got over on Azeez in his last fight, is next in line as a strong candidate to challenge for the undisputed title at the light heavyweight division. Now, would I say Buatsi is ready? I'd like to see him fight more high caliber opponents before he steps in there with a top 10 pound for pound fighter by the likes of a Bivol and Beterbiev. And an ideal opponent for Joshua Buatsi would be a fighter like Anthony Yarde, who has enough experience, who's gotten in the ring with the likes of Arthur Beterbiev and gave up a good fight versus Beterbiev. And if you didn't see, Anthony Yarde in his last fight picked up a impressive first round knockout. And with the ability and the reputation and the resume that Anthony Yarde has, he would be a good test for a fighter like Joshua Buatsi and for Dan Azeez as well, because one defeat isn't a detrimental look for a fighter like Dan Azeez, because he is still a prospect that has long ways to go. And I'm sure that if he continues to pick up wins, he can still have a future at potentially becoming a champion perhaps in the future. And you look at, as boxing fans commonly know, that a defeat doesn't hurt a fighter's career. You look at majority of the greats throughout the history of boxing, majority of the greats that are considered to be legends have more than one defeat in their professional boxing career. And another opponent that would be a tough test for both fighters would be a fighter like not only an Anthony Yarde, but a Gilberto Ramirez, a Liam Smith, and these would be tough opponents for a prospect by the likes of Joshua Buatsi and Dan Azeez. Anyways, moving along to the next topic at hand. Let's talk about Conor Benn's comeback performance after that long layoff after getting caught with performance enhancement drugs. When he tested positive for performance enhancement drugs prior to the fight that was scheduled for him to face Chris Eubank Jr., that fight would have been another big magnitude of a fight out there in the UK when they would have fought, because of the fathers having a past history, and with both Eubank and Benn being second-generation talents, and them having a fight scheduled out there in the UK would have been a huge draw out there for the local domestic scene in England. But unfortunately, for those that was looking forward to that fight happening, Conor Benn tested positive for performance enhancement drugs. And that's why he took more than a year off. And I don't know what Conor Benn's situation is looking like, because Conor Benn had this fight being hosted in America instead of in the UK, where he usually has his fights being hosted at. And Conor Benn is promoted by Matchroom, and most of his fights is hosted in England, and he is with a English boxing promotion company. And that fight, as I had said before, was scheduled to be in England, but he got caught by the British Boxing Commissions for performance enhancement drugs. Maybe that's why this fight was hosted in Las Vegas instead of the UK. And I don't know when it comes to the politics of what the situation is looking like for Conor Benn, and if he's able to fight in the UK in the future. And this fight didn't have the turnout of an event that Conor Benn is used to having, because, as I mentioned before, the local scene when it comes to boxing is more lively in England than in America. And Peter Dobson being an American fighter, and Conor Benn has fought non-British fighters in England before because of the notoriety that Conor Benn carries with his name. But this fight wasn't the usual turnout of an event that Conor Benn and his promotion has been used to fighting in. And Peter Dobson isn't a well-known, reputable fighter, regardless of the fact that prior to this fight, he was undefeated. And obviously, this fight wasn't as tough of a test when compared to the fight that he was scheduled to fight with Chris Eubank Jr. with. And Chris Eubank Jr., he has more of a reputation, not only because he's a second-generation talent, but he has more experience and has more of a impressive resume than Peter Dobson. Peter Dobson, if you didn't see the fight on the zone, the commentators was talking about his reputation because Peter Dobson hasn't fought enough opponents that are considered to be high ranking. They were talking about Peter Dobson having training camps with Terrence Crawford and him having sparring sessions with Terrence Crawford being an impressive resume factor for Peter Dobson. That goes to show Peter Dobson's resume was lacking, and it wasn't a much of a step up in competition for Conor Benn. And to not say excuse Conor Benn's fight with Peter Dobson, but to make it more easier for Conor Benn, after a layoff, this isn't a bad look for Conor Benn with the layoff that he had. And he wants to shake off that ring rust that he had heading into this fight after the layoff that he had. And he looked like he picked up from where he left off at, because this was a one-sided fight from Conor Benn, because Conor Benn dictated majority of this fight. He was the dominant fighter in this fight. Peter Dobson couldn't get any of his shots off, and Conor Benn was pressing the action in this fight. Conor Benn was working off of volume. His work rate was having Peter Dobson in his shell, in his guard, and on retreat mode. And Conor Benn was working with combination of punches and was bringing the pressure to Peter Dobson and was controlling the range in this fight, was forcing Peter Dobson back. And when Conor Benn would land his shots, it would have an effect on Peter Dobson. And Conor Benn brought it to him from the start of this fight. And Conor Benn was consistent all throughout the 12 rounds of this fight. And I had this fight score 118 to 110 in favor of Conor Benn. Conor Benn, the only two rounds that I had scored in favor of Peter Dobson instead of Conor Benn was the 5th round and the 12th round. And Peter Dobson was able to read the rhythm of Conor Benn as the mid-rounds was approaching. And when he was able to telegraph the rhythm of Conor Benn's offense and his fight plan, that's when Peter Dobson was able to counter and was able to land punches in the midst of Conor Benn's approach of aggressive, come forward, pressure style. And Conor Benn was getting the better of the exchange throughout, as I said, majority of the fight. And he wasn't letting Peter Dobson counter with the counter shots from the attacks that Conor Benn was bringing forward to him, because of the work rate and because of the power of Conor Benn that was forcing Peter Dobson to be in his shell and be on defense mode and have his guard on high. And that's why he wasn't able to place his counter punches in between the shots that Conor Benn was bringing forward to him. And now that Conor Benn was able to show that he was able to pick up from where he left off at, and Peter Dobson, as I have said, isn't a step up in the ladder of competition for Conor Benn. Chris Eubank Jr. would have been, not only would have been a step up in competition for Conor Benn, it would have been a step up in weight for Conor Benn, because Conor Benn is used to fighting at welterweight, while Chris Eubank Jr. could fight all the way up to light heavyweight if he wanted to. Chris Eubank Jr. is a super middleweight to middleweight fighter, and that's why this fight, when it was scheduled, was supposed to be at catchweight. Not making excuses to why Conor Benn was taking pets, and they could have said, if they was arguing for Conor Benn's sake, he wanted to make weight in preparation for that fight coming up versus Chris Eubank Jr. Now, I didn't follow up with the media hype and the talks of the media when it comes to what Conor Benn and his team wants to do in the future. Now, do they want to pick up on the fight that was canceled with him and Eubank Jr.? I don't know because I didn't pay attention to the media talks. Now, does that fight intrigue me? Not really, because Conor Benn, I think, should continue fighting at welterweight and look to strive to be a future champion at welterweight. There's marketable names out there that Conor Benn can fight with the notoriety that he has, and if he picks up impressive victories versus more notable names at welterweight, he could line himself up for a title shot in the future at welterweight. And an ideal opponent for Conor Benn, perhaps in the future, that he could face would be Adrian Broner. And that's been a rumored opponent for Conor Benn for a while now. A former multi-division champion like Adrian Broner, who has experience fighting top-notch names, who is a very well-skilled fighter. That would be a tough test for Conor Benn. And it would be a good fight for Conor Benn to gain more notoriety, especially if he wants to gain more followings outside of the UK. There's also guys like Royman Villa, and there's Sergey Lipinets, and there's guys like Jaron Ennis as well, who's the current IBF welterweight champion, and what's his name? Karan Chakazian, and those fights would be a step up in competition for Conor Benn. Now, would I say Conor Benn is ready to take on the likes of Jaron Ennis? No, because Conor Benn hasn't been tested on the level of a Jaron Ennis yet. You compare the resume of these two undefeated fighters, it's a reason why Jaron Ennis is a current champion, even though he shouldn't be, because the IBF had made Terence Crawford vacate the IBF welterweight title after that dominant performance that was considered to be the performance of the year for the year 2023 last year, when he was able to stop Errol Spence in their undisputed welterweight title bout. And Terence Crawford still hasn't yet to defend that undisputed welterweight title that he had won from what was considered to be the biggest fight of last year with him and Errol Spence. And to be honest with you, I don't think Conor Benn is ready for Errol Spence either, because you compare the resume to Conor Benn and Errol Spence, it's uncomparable. Errol Spence still has the most notable fights amongst the top of the welterweight division, and he's still considered to be one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in all of boxing right now. And Conor Benn, I would say, is a level above a fighter such as a Campbell Hatton, who is rumored to be the next opponent to Terence Crawford. And I would say Conor Benn has more of a impressive resume than Campbell Hatton. And if Campbell Hatton can get a fight versus Terence Crawford for the unified welterweight titles, then Conor Benn, people can argue, can be ready to challenge for the welterweight titles versus either Terence Crawford or Jaron Ennis, despite the fact that I say Conor Benn isn't ready to fight a fighter like a Terence Crawford, Errol Spence, or Jaron Ennis. And as I have said, a ideal candidate opponent for Conor Benn for his next fight would be a fighter like a Adrian Broner, a fighter like a Chakazan, a Royman Villa, fighters of that caliber, before he could fight guys like a Jaron Ennis, Errol Spence, and Terence Crawford. He could have a fight versus Campbell Hatton. The Hatton family is a notable name out there in the UK, and Conor Benn is a fighter based out of the UK as well. And with the local scene that is healthy and lively in the sport of boxing out there in the UK, and with both the Benn family and the Hatton family having a notable name, it would be a huge magnitude of an event out there in the UK. And it would be somewhat of a similar magnitude as the fight that was originally scheduled with Benn and Eubank. It won't have as much hype because it doesn't have the history that their fathers had, but that fight would still be an ideal fight to make happen of a big event feel. And they're more closer in weight than Eubank and Benn is. And if they were to fight, I'm talking about Benn and Hatton, and both fighters competing at welterweight, the winner of that fight would line himself up to have a stronger shot at the welterweight titles. Now, that fight with Crawford and Hatton is only rumored. I don't know if it's been made official yet. Is Hatton deserving of that fight versus Crawford? No, because he hasn't fought enough names out there. I would say Crawford would be the first notable fighter that Hatton would face in his current undefeated professional career. Now, those fighters who I said would be ideal opponents for Conor Benn to fight next would be the same for Hatton. And that's my post-fight opinions on this fight with Conor Benn and Peter Dobson. Anyways, let's move on to the next topic at hand. Before I move on to the next topic at hand, I was going to say, does Conor Benn want to move up to super welterweight instead of continue fighting at welterweight? I know this fight was at catchweight, but it was above the 147-pound weight limit that the welterweights usually compete at. Now, can Conor Benn make the weight at super welterweight without having to put on extra weight, without being bloated, without using performance enhancement drugs to want to make weight? Now, naturally, does Conor Benn fit more at 147, frame-wise speaking? Yes. Now, if I was on this team, I would say continue fighting at 147 because there's more marketable names for Conor Benn to fight out there at welterweight than at super welterweight. There's Jermell Charlo, Tim Tszyu. I know Keith Thurman is going to fight Tim Tszyu later this month at super welterweight for the WBO super welterweight title. Now, Keith Thurman, as he's expected to most likely to lose versus Tim Tszyu in their fight coming up later this month. Now, if Keith Thurman wants to continue his professional boxing career, then it would be ideal for Keith Thurman to want to move to 147 and compete at welterweight again, and Keith Thurman would be a good stepping stool for Conor Benn to step up in the ladder of competition. And Keith Thurman being the former welterweight champion, if Conor Benn can get a victory over on Keith Thurman with the current stage that Conor Benn is at right now, it would be a good look for Conor Benn because that would be a notable name on his ongoing resume that Conor Benn is creating right now. And Danny Garcia is another former champion that fought amongst the welterweights and that fought the top welterweights when he was competing at welterweight, that also competes at super welterweight. That would be another good fight for Conor Benn if Conor Benn wants to take that leap in weight and leave the welterweight division and move up to super welterweight. There's also guys like Sebastian Fundora. There's guys like Brian Mendoza. And these fights would be a good look for Conor Benn. Now, I know those fighters fight with the PBC promotion and not Matchroom and the Zone. Now, PBC and Matchroom and the Zone and now Amazon Prime, they don't do interpromotional works as much as other promotions. Now, that's why those fights would be harder to make for Conor Benn and his promotion if he was to step up to super welterweight. And with guys like Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence, and Jaron Ennis being PBC fighters as well. Now, I know Terrence Crawford only worked with PBC to make that fight happen versus Errol Spence. And I know Terrence Crawford has his own promotional company, and I don't know if Terrence Crawford is gonna have that fight with Campbell Hatton if that fight gets made official. And if that fight does get made official, will that fight be aired on PBC and Amazon Prime? And if y'all look at Terrence Crawford's prior fight before he fought Errol Spence, that fight was streamed on a lesser known streaming service app called Black. I think that's what that streaming app service is called. It's called Black. Regis Progress had his championship fight versus Zepeda broadcasted on that app as well. Now, I don't know if it's going to be on Sky Sports in the UK, because that's where Campbell Hatton has his fights being broadcasted at. And that's why the promotional issue is what makes it somewhat difficult for Conor Benn to have these marketable fights happen for him at welterweight. And if he fights Chris Eubank Jr., that fight would be aired on the Zone and Sky Sports. It would be a huge fight out there in the UK. He could make that fight happen versus Campbell Hatton as well. That would be a good fight as well. It would be harder for him to have fights versus PBC fighters. And PBC has majority of the notable welterweights fighting with their promotion. And Adrian Broner, who had his fight not aired at all on a notable network, that fight can be somewhat easy to make happen as well. And now let's move on to the next topic at hand. Let's talk about the fight that was for the welterweight title between Natasha Jonas and Mikaela Mayer. I had this fight scored a draw. I had it 5 rounds each for both fighters. However, Natasha Jonas picked up the split decision win. This was a action-packed fight, and it had good back-and-forth action. Both fighters gave it their best, and it was one of the best fights that I saw from this year. I know we got a long way to go when it comes to the remainder of the year, but this fight was very active, and it was a fan-friendly style fight. And both Jonas and Mayer are fighters that are considered to be high caliber, high ranked fighters that is well respected amongst the top of the women's boxing. And Natasha Jonas, her picking up this win, continues a streak, and I say this is one of, if not the best opponent that she's faced thus far in Mikaela Mayer, who is a very highly skilled, well-sound fighter and well-experienced as well. And how this fight went, Natasha Jonas, she wasn't the one that was aggressive. Mikaela Mayer was more aggressive, especially during the later rounds of the fight. Mikaela Mayer was bringing the pressure to Natasha Jonas as Natasha Jonas's stamina started to wear out. And that's when Mikaela Mayer was bringing the volume and was turning up the work rate to Natasha Jonas, forcing Natasha Jonas to fight off the back foot and be on the counterattack of Mikaela Mayer's aggressive come forward style, with her throwing volumes of punches at an impressive volume. And Natasha Jonas, her combinations, her work rate, her punch placement was what got her the victory in this fight, even though I had this fight scored a draw. And Natasha Jonas, she was, I would say, getting the better of the exchange, especially during the beginning part of the fight. And as I had said before, this fight was of a big magnitude. And shout out to Mikaela Mayer, because she went to the UK to make this fight happen. With Mikaela Mayer being an American fighter, I don't think she's ever fought outside of America before this fight. And Natasha Jonas, she is a British-based fighter, and she's been building a good following out there in the UK, and there's a good amount of support for Natasha Jonas. And with the streak that Natasha Jonas got going on right now, with her picking up impressive victories versus impressive names that are well notable amongst female boxing in the super welterweight and welterweight division, that's why she is continuing her hot streak, and her getting this win over on Mikaela Mayer is a good look on her part. And with the momentum that she got going on right now, and Jonas being the IBF welterweight women's champion, the majority champion at welterweight is Jessica McCaskill. She has the WBC, WBA, and the Ring Magazine lineal women's welterweight titles, and the WBO title is vacant. And McCaskill, she fought Sandy Ryan to a draw when they competed for the vacant WBO welterweight title. Now, if Ryan and McCaskill have a rematch for the unified welterweight titles, and whoever walks out victorious of that fight can fight Jonas for the undisputed women's welterweight titles. Now, that would be a good look for the welterweight division in women's boxing. And Sandy Ryan, she is a local English fighter as well, as is Natasha Jonas. If Sandy Ryan was to walk out the winner of that fight for the undisputed women's welterweight title would be another good look for the local British boxing scene in the women's department. And as for Jessica McCaskill, who is an American fighter, she's fought in England before when she fought Katie Taylor in the light welterweight division. And when she fought at super lightweight, she fought Chantel Cameron and Katie Taylor. And that was, as I said, at super lightweight. But Jessica McCaskill is the current majority unified champion at welterweight. And she fought Chantel Cameron in Abu Dhabi, and she fought Katie Taylor in the UK. And Natasha Jonas is more of a noticeable name than Jessica McCaskill when it comes to notoriety in female boxing. Now, if that undisputed welterweight title fight were to happen, idealistically speaking, it would be better for that fight to happen in the UK, promotionally and marketably speaking, because, as I have said, the British boxing fan base tend to show more support for the sport than in America, and Natasha Jonas is more of a notable name than Jessica McCaskill. And if Jessica McCaskill and Sandy Ryan have a rematch for the unified welterweight titles, and either or, whoever wins that fight, I think should fight Natasha Jonas next to determine who will be the undisputed champion at welterweight in women's boxing. And as for Mikaela Mayer goes, she's still a top-notch talent in all of women's boxing. And she can fluctuate between super featherweight all the way up to welterweight. Now, I wouldn't mind seeing another fight with Mikaela Mayer and Natasha Jonas because of how close and competitive this fight was. As I had mentioned before, not only on the official judges' scorecard did this fight end in a split decision, I had this fight scored personally a draw. And that's why this fight, if they were to make it happen again, I wouldn't mind. And Mikaela Mayer, she can fight Jessica McCaskill, Sandy Ryan, whoever walks away the winner of that fight, if they were to have another fight with McCaskill and Ryan. Or she could challenge McCaskill, because that would be a tough task for McCaskill to defend their unified welterweight titles against. And there's also fighters that's at welterweight by the name of Orlela Domini and Cecilia Brækhus, a Norwegian fighter that competes at welterweight and at super welterweight as well. Or she could compete at lightweight and at super lightweight as well. She would be a tough test for Katie Taylor, Chantel Cameron. There's girls like Savannah Marshall as well who fights at super welterweight. If Mikaela Mayer wants to step up and weight again and take on a new weight class as super welterweight, and she could also compete at super featherweight as well. And Mikaela Mayer still would be a tough test for any champion amongst the weight classes that I have mentioned. Anyways, moving on to the next topic. Let's talk about what's been surfacing amongst the boxing scene as of late. And I know I've been telling y'all on the community post that I was going to talk about the postponing of the Tyson Fury Alexander Usyk fight that was originally scheduled for the 17th of February in Saudi Arabia. That fight got delayed because during Tyson Fury's training camp, when he was sparring one of his training camp member in the ring, he has suffered a cut above his eye. That is what led to the fight being postponed to the 18th of May. So this fight is still happening in May, and that's in a few months. And Tyson Fury, I don't think he had the best preparation heading into this undisputed heavyweight title fight. You look at his disappointing performance versus Francis Ngannou in what was considered to be an exhibition boxing bout, a cross-sport bout that we saw with Fury and Ngannou, with a former UFC heavyweight champion taking on the current lineal heavyweight champion, or the current WBC heavyweight champion, Tyson Fury. And Tyson Fury got dropped in that fight. This fight went the distance when, on paper, Tyson Fury was supposed to blow Francis Ngannou out the water, but that didn't happen. And Tyson Fury, that fight with the time slot that Tyson Fury had in preparation leading to that fight that was originally scheduled for February 17th versus Alexander Usyk, the current majority unified heavyweight champion. It was October, November, December, January. So Tyson Fury would have only had 4 months to prep for that fight. And that fight is the biggest heavyweight fight to make happen. And that's not enough time for Tyson Fury to prep for a fight of that magnitude. Alexander Usyk, on the other hand, he had his last fight in the summer of last year. And Alexander Usyk, regardless of the fact that he didn't have the best performance in his last fight versus Daniel Dubois, who isn't the best opponent in the heavyweight division, he's up there to be in the top 10, the top 15 best heavyweight fighters amongst the top of the heavyweights, but he's not on the same level as a Tyson Fury or even a Anthony Joshua or Zhao Zhang, Joseph Parker, guys like that. And Alexander Usyk, even though he didn't have the best performance, he still got the victory, and he didn't go the distance with Daniel Dubois. And he had a moment where he got dropped. It was a questionable controversy that happened during that fight. I talked about it for that post-fight video for that specific fight with Usyk and Dubois. But Usyk won majority of the fight before stopping Daniel Dubois. And he had more time to train in preparation for that fight that's coming up for the undisputed heavyweight title. And Tyson Fury, what does it say about Tyson Fury and his training camp in preparation for that fight if he's suffering a cut above his eye during sparring sessions? I know all fighters, despite the fact that he is a high-ranked fighter amongst the elites in the sport of boxing, can have an off day during training camp. And this is a sport of boxing. This is a fight game. Anything can happen. And Tyson Fury, you look at his momentum heading into this fight. His fight with Francis Ngannou, rather disappointing. Didn't put on the performance that we're used to seeing Tyson Fury performing. And then we're hearing Tyson Fury getting injured during his training camp sparring sessions. And with more time being given for not only Tyson Fury, but both fighters in preparation for this fight coming up for the undisputed heavyweight title, gives them more proper time to get themselves right, to be ready, to prep for this fight of this huge magnitude. Now, I'll make a preview video to this specific fight for a whole nother video. I'm just breaking the news to y'all and giving y'all my opinion with the news that broke out for why this fight got postponed. Anyways, moving on to the next topic. It was announced last month that for the WBC Super Lightweight title, Devin Haney will be defending his newly won WBC Super Lightweight title versus Ryan Garcia. They have an extensive history. They both came up amongst the amateurs together, and they have competed against one another during their amateur career, and they have fought more than once. They have fought more than 3 times. I believe they fought more than 7 or 8 times. And their family have a history together as well, because both of their families were a part of their amateur careers as they are a part of their professional careers as well. And with both Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia having the reputation and the notable names that they have, this fight is of a pay-per-view magnitude. I would say it's almost as big, if not as big, as the fight that we saw last year with Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis. Despite the fact that Ryan Garcia isn't undefeated anymore, he's still one of the most well-recognized names amongst the sport of boxing. And Devin Haney, one of the most skilled boxers in the world today, and is considered to be, if not top 10, top 5 best pound-for-pound fighters in the sport of boxing. Former undisputed lightweight champion who's took on the toughest opponents that he can face during his ongoing impressive resume that he still has going on to this day. And his last performance in his debut fight at super lightweight versus one of the most well-reckoned names in super lightweight, the former champion Regis Progress, he blew Regis Progress out the water, and he shut out Regis Progress 12-0, and that was one of the most dominant performances that we saw last year. And Ryan Garcia, who has more experience fighting at super lightweight than Devin Haney, but Devin Haney showed that he's a natural at super lightweight. His frame fits the weight limit at super lightweight, and he still has the skills that he possessed at lightweight at super lightweight, and he looks more comfortable competing at super lightweight than he did at lightweight, where he had to drain himself to make weight at lightweight. That's why he vacated his undisputed lightweight titles, for him to try and become undisputed at super lightweight as well. And he took on what was considered to be the best super lightweight at that division in Regis Progress, and he dominated that fight. And now he's taking on Ryan Garcia. He isn't taking breaks where he's not fighting a elite name. And that's why I got to give credit to Devin Haney and his team and his promotion for him to want to fight the best. And this fight is having the media hype that it has because the history that both Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney share. And the media, the press work that these fighters and their respective teams are doing for the promotional aspect of it, there's hype surrounding this fight because of the back and forth amongst these fighters and their respective teams. And I'm looking forward to it. As I said, this is one of the best fights that's going to be produced out of this year. And Ryan Garcia, in his bounce back fight from his first defeat that he suffered versus Gervonta Davis, it wasn't the best Ryan Garcia performance I've seen, But Ryan Garcia is a very high skilled fighter, very fast fighter, very well respected fighter. And I'm not talking about the marketable promotional aspect of it. I'm talking about the purity sake of the sports when it comes to the skills that Ryan Garcia possesses. He is still a very talented fighter and possesses a threat to Devin Haney's WBC super lightweight title. And this fight, as I have said, I'm looking forward to it. It's a fight of a pay-per-view magnitude, and this fight is not going to be on pay-per-view. It's going to be on the Zone, and that is a free giveaway to not only the boxing fans, but this fight is a fight that the public is looking forward to. Now, I know there's been controversy surrounding Ryan Garcia and what he's been on as of lately. People are questioning if Ryan Garcia is well prepping for this huge fight coming up on the 20th of April. Now, he did say that he's going to be off of social media for the remainder of 5 weeks that he has left in his training camp in preparation for this fight, to get himself physically and mentally ready to have this fight to be happening, and for him to head into this fight in the best shape and the best condition that he can be in, because this fight is for a title, and Devin Haney, I would say, is a champion and has been tested more than Gervonta Davis and has fought more notable opponents than Gervonta Davis. And when I talk about pure skills, when it comes to the technical fundamental aspects, when it comes to the purity sake of the sport, Devin Haney, I would say, is a more technically sound fighter than Gervonta Davis. That's why I say it's almost, if not more, of a tough test for Ryan Garcia to have this fight versus Devin Haney than Gervonta Davis. And Ryan Garcia knows Devin Haney very well because of the shared history that both of these fighters have. And I know fans can say, oh, they could have grew and they could have adapted more skills and they could have refreshed their game as they stepped into their professional boxing career. But hey, we'll see on the 20th of April how this fight goes. And I'm favoring Devin Haney to win this fight, but I'm going to make a whole preview video on this fight. And it's going to have a video of its own. And I'm just breaking the news to y'all as this fight was announced last month that it will be happening, and I'm for surely looking forward to it. Anyways, moving on to the next topic at hand. Now, this news I was disappointed with, because it was announced yesterday that Saul Canelo Alvarez will be defending his undisputed super middleweight title versus undefeated prospect Jamie Munguia on the 4th of May, and it was rumored that Saul Alvarez will be taking on David Benavidez. And this fight will be on PBC Amazon Prime. And Jamie Munguia is promoted by Golden Boy, and he had all his fights being aired on the Zone. Now, this is a interpromotional fight that we're going to see. And this isn't a cross interpromotional network fight where it's going to be both the Zone Network and Amazon Prime Network working together. It's Canelo Alvarez and PBC and Golden Boy working together, having this fight being aired on Amazon Prime pay-per-view. And Saul Alvarez, it would have been much easier for Saul Alvarez and PBC to pick David Benavidez as Saul Alvarez's next opponent to challenge Saul Alvarez for the undisputed super middleweight title, because David Benavidez is already promoted by PBC. It wouldn't have been a cross-promotional fight if they would have had David Benavidez fight Saul Alvarez instead of having Jamie Munguia fight Saul Alvarez and reaching out to Golden Boy. And David Benavidez is the more deserving fighter to challenge Canelo for his undisputed super middleweight title. Not only is David Benavidez more experienced, he's fought more better quality opponents than Jamie Munguia, and David Benavidez was a former champion that was made to vacate his super middleweight title, and then he bounced back by defeating former champion Caleb Plant and former two-division champion Demetrius Andrade, who was undefeated prior to losing to David Benavidez. And Demetrius Andrade was a champion at both middleweight and as super welterweight. And David Benavidez, not only did he defeat Demetrius Andrade, he was able to stop Demetrius Andrade. And with the momentum that David Benavidez has right now, it was obvious that he was the ideal opponent that should have been next in line to challenge for the undisputed super middleweight title, and he was very well deserving. And now David Benavidez, with this 2 back-to-back impressive victories that he had got and earned in his last 2 fights, made himself more noticeable, more marketable, and put himself more out there. And he headlined his own pay-per-view bouts, unlike Jamie Munguia. Now, Jamie Munguia has been proving himself and has a fan-friendly style and is undefeated and has an extensive resume that is impressive. And he is a good fighter, but I would not place him above David Benavidez, and I could confidently say that. And I did say that the only fight Saul Alvarez has left before I could say he could hang up the gloves, and I wouldn't mind if Saul Alvarez was to hang up the gloves right now, because he's done it all already. And I said David Benavidez is the only opponent left for Saul Alvarez to take on before he can confidently say and comfortably say that he's done it all. And it was rumored that he was either going to take on David Benavidez, Jamie Munguia, or Jermall Charlo. And Jermall Charlo, he recently came back from his long 2-year layoff. He looked like he wasn't missing a beat from his comeback performance. He picked up from where he left off at. He didn't show any signs of ring rust, but he still has to gain more experience and fight higher quality opponents, especially if he's going to challenge Saul Alvarez for the undisputed super middleweight title in a new division that he's going to be fighting at, because Jermall Charlo is a champion at middleweight and he's only been fighting at middleweight, and he's only recently moved up to super middleweight to try and chase that big money fight versus Canelo. And he has to fight more notable opponents at super middleweight for him to be considered to be next in line to challenge for the undisputed super middleweight title. And he can't just skip the line and have a fight, despite the fact that he's already a well-reckoned name and is marketable and is noticeable in all the boxing. And the reputation that Jermall Charlo has, him being a highly skilled fighter, he can skip the line, but I'll say, idealistically speaking, he should face opponents like a Demetrius Andrade, Caleb Plant, David Benavidez, for him to be considered to be a legitimate challenger for the undisputed super middleweight title. And then Jamie Munguia, as I have said, he has experience, but he doesn't have the good quality opponents that David Benavidez has. And I'm looking forward to this fight. Yeah, I am. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Jamie Munguia can do versus Saul Alvarez, because he hasn't fought a fighter that is on the level of a champion as of yet. And I would consider Jamie Munguia to be green still, and it would be a huge step in the ladder of competition for Jamie Munguia to challenge for the undisputed super middleweight titles. And as I said, he has experience, but he doesn't have the names where it makes fans look at his resume and go, whoa, that's an impressive resume. Look at who he's defeated. That's why I was disappointed with the news that broke out yesterday that Jamie Munguia got this shot at the undisputed super middleweight title than David Benavidez. Anyways, that does it for this episode of Talk Boxing. Y'all let me know what y'all opinions are on all the topics that I covered on this episode. And subscribe to this channel for more content, and share and like this video if y'all want, and show y'all support for this channel by clicking the links in the description. Anything will be appreciated. And I'm out of here, y'all. Be good. Peace.